Okay, so in this video we're going to create some interesting ridged sort of mountain shapes. These claw-like features that you can see in certain mountain areas. You can see it on islands like the French Polynesian islands and those kind of things. So we're going to start off with the default base mountain that's here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to invert that. So just go ahead and invert that. We can do that in layer mode or this mode. We're just going to build it out. And with that, we're going to create the spiny little bits by applying a breaker node. So the breaker node is going to create those sort of lightning bolt sort of cracks and fissures that happen in there. And for this to work nicely, we're going to have to increase the amount for them a fair bit. So that breaker node, we're going to take the duration up. And when you take the duration up, let's go up a little bit, maybe a little bit more, somewhere in the thousands. It's going to create more of those. It's not just going to make it bigger, but it's going to create more of them. And we'll get that in there. You can also increase the erosion power a little bit if you want. Really kind of tear it to pieces. And what you're seeing there is you may be seeing it flip back and forth. Don't always trust what you see initially. Go back and then come back to it again if you see that kind of flipping action, because you might be seeing something it was thinking about as it was calculating it. So we've got that breaker in there, and then we're going to go ahead and invert that again. So if we grab the invert once more, and what you'll start to see is this spiny, spindly form. Now this of course is not it. This is not, you know, the end step, but this is how we're gaining these sorts of shapes. Now this will work really nicely at the 512 level, and the idea of this is we're creating ourselves a new base form, and we're going to bake that out, and then we'll take it back in afterwards and detail it. So sometimes, as I've said in previous videos, it's about trying to get a good starting point and then moving to something else. In some other software, you know, you may expect to do everything kind of at once, and this is sort of more of an iterative process. You build up the forms, you get something that looks good as a base, you've got lots of different kinds of controls, but because these have the scale relationship, as I said before, it's important to check which one is going to work the best for you. You know, try things at different resolutions and see what they look like, and maybe you like them better for different kinds of things. So this exact same recipe that we're going to go through here might actually produce an interesting result of a different kind if you increase the resolution, and you'll have to test that out and see what happens. So just keep in mind that this value right here is an important part of this recipe. So I've inverted it here. I'm going to add a little bit more breakup to this by adding another breaker. So another breaker in there, connect that, make the fancy spaceship noises to make it work better. No, we'll take that up fairly high and really crack it to pieces. And that's created some additional deep grooves, but what you're seeing here is it's creating these slopes, or the start of these slopes, that you weren't necessarily getting from before. These are really thin shapes, and now they're thin shapes on top of these sort of mounds. So that's what the second breaker is doing, is it's creating these segmentations that give that sort of overlapping mounds kind of look. Now, the unfortunate thing here is that you can see along the ridges is that they've been really broken up. So we're going to have to come up with a way of healing that. And the way that I determined was to go ahead and make use of aperture. And aperture in its defaults will expand the top of them, and it corrects some of it anyways, to a certain degree. Now, I'm happy also with the fact that it's increased that kind of overlapping shape. These mounds are kind of coming together, which is exactly what I want. But the tops, the ridges, are no longer sharp, so we're going to go ahead and aperture it again. But I like the fact that the bases are kind of fat, but I still want the tops to be thin. So what we're going to do is we're going to aperture that again, and we're going to make that a contraction. But in this particular case, I'm going to use the height of this map to help me control it, so that I'm going to get the ridges. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug it into the mask input, and that's going to mask that. And watch what happens when we do this. I'm going to go ahead and connect this, and just the tops, the very top ridges, are getting it, and they're kind of fading out into this base, which is really nice. Okay, so we're partway there. We're doing a pretty good job. I want to even out some of these shapes a little bit more, get these mounds a little bit softer, bring the ridges down a little bit, just in overall height. And so the best way to sort of soften this form, of course, is to blur it. So if I go ahead and take a blur node and blur it, it's going to chew through this. Because it's just a 512K, it's not going to take too long, but I lose all my detail. And I have a couple options. I can go ahead and reduce power to like all the way down to a 0.1 if I wanted, and I'll get some of that back. But there's another way that I can get some of the shape back with taking some of this form, and that's going to be a combine. So we're going to go to the combine node right there, and we're going to combine this shape, this new blurred shape, with the original spiny shape. And what that's done is we've gone from this to this. It's brought those ridges down. We've got a really nice shape off of here, and that's turning out pretty good. Now, if we want to control it further, of course, we can throw a nice bias gain in there. Just, oops, grab that node. There. Spaceship noises again, absolutely necessary. We'll connect that in there, and we can of course bring these down until we feel like they're kind of, the natural shape that we might like. And we could of course, go ahead and erode it or something, but what I found is a nice fast way of getting this to look like some cool spiny shapes again is just go to the landform node. And the landform node, its whole job is to go ahead and add some nice noise into it, and kind of take these shapes and massage them a little bit by sharpening some edges and deepening grooves and so on and so forth. So let's plug that in. It's going to chew through that for a little bit, and now we've got this cool spiny terrain. Now it's all going to depend on your starting point, and this may be enough for you. This may be enough to create sort of like a mountain area. You can experiment with this overall recipe starting from different starting points. But I'm going to do something a little bit special with this. I did kind of like that peaked mountain look that I started with. So I'm going to take these guys. Let's just move this up. And I'm going to add one last step, and that's taking the combine node, and I'm going to connect this spiny form to the original mountain. And so this has given me a starting point for this. It's pretty cool. It's taken that and turned it into a nice little mountain shape, but I want to do something a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and go to the add instead, and that's going to bring that mountain peak that was there right back in. And depending on how much of these ridges I want, I can play with this bias right here. I could eliminate it entirely or just bring it all the way back up, and then come back to this, and those ridges are a little bit more pronounced. And of course, you have to be careful, but you can, enhance it that way as well. You can try another one of these blending modes. But add screen. Whoa! And so they're really prominent on top of that. Here they're kind of carving in, making some interesting results. Here they're combined in a neat sort of way. And difference, that's cutting them out. So you can experiment with these different kinds of addition modes. I'm happy with the add feature, down around 50%. And that's that base form, which I will of course go and then save the current and use this as my starting point instead of the default mountain. So this is again all about creating a starting point overall. And we can use and reuse this again and again just simply by changing the seed that's here. You can go ahead and grab a different seed, work your way through the list. It's going through and where are we? Adding breaker, inverting it again, another breaker, tear it apart, aperture, get that back and pinch it. And we've got nice little overlapping shapes in there. Go ahead and blur that, combine it back with itself so we can get that. Bias gain is not doing anything because it's set to full. Landform that, which is going to create those nice little ridges. And there we go. And again, you can add it back in and into itself and play with that. Look at these lovely little shapes down in here. So that's a great little feature right there. So again, this is the basic recipe for creating this. It's the thought method. Ultimately, it's creating the breaker in one direction, upside down, so it creates those initial spines that grow across the surface, and then inverting it and using the breaker again to carve in between them, in between those shapes, and create these mounds that you want. And then after that, it's just enhancing that mound form through the use of, there's that correction and then pinching, and then with the blur, and all of these things are getting into this point of kind of building it back up into sort of more of a triangular mound form and getting it back into that eventual shape that you want. You could even pinch it from there as well if you wanted to use that height trick again, should you desire, using aperture. And then if you want to control, again, how much of it is there, you can do that. And then the landform will go ahead and convert it into some nice sharp ridges for you. So I don't really need to do the pinching unless I want to keep it as it is, which could be interesting. I could go ahead and pinch it and erode it and do other stuff. But that's your basic recipe.